Welcome to Creative Outlets. My name is Zachary Hines, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host,
Horne, and we're here with Sam Obeid. Hi, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Greatly appreciate it.
It's so good to meet you virtually. I've become Kaden, who is a fabulous staff and board member of TIGLIF, introduced us to your work, and I have been just fangirling all over it just for the past few months now, actually. So it's such a pleasure to meet you.
I just got done watching a fascinating TEDx talk that you did at USF, I think, and it had your photography displayed in the background. But I've also really enjoyed, I saw the very first poem you did, Boxes, which I loved. I think that is a total classic.
As far as poetry is concerned, I started doing open mic night 2011. Okay, so I can't believe it's been 10 years. Wow. 2011, I started doing open mic night. It was random. I didn't know what open mic was. I had a friend at USF. I was working at USF at the Office of International Affairs. And I had a friend who said, hey, we should totally go do this. It was strange because we had never hung out. And I was leaving. And the week that I left, she was like, you should totally hang out. Have you ever been to an open mic night? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. She told me what it was. She was like, we should go. We went, had such a phenomenal time. And then she's like, okay, you know what? I've always wanted to perform at one of these things, but I've never had the guts to do it. How do you feel about, because I used to write. I was in journalism and I still used to write and do stuff. She was like, how do you feel about you write a poem, I write a poem, because it was first Friday of every month. So we have a month to do this. And I was like, let's go. Let's make it happen. That's when I wrote Boxes.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what we are in right now, Boxes. So,
that's when I wrote Boxes. And it was 2011. I had been here for 4 years at that point, in the US for 4 years, in Tampa for 3 years at that point. And I was figuring things out, you know, like I've always been very comfortable with my sexuality, but gender was such a mind-blowing event for me. All the time that I was in India, because that's where I was born and raised, it was definitely like something that I was constantly thinking about, but not a lot of opportunity, right? To think about it differently from what I was seeing. And I was seeing very little of what gender could be. And then I moved here, Michigan, not so much. But then when I moved to Florida, I was like, what? Within the first month that I came to Florida, I went to Ybor. So you can imagine where my head was. I had so much going on. And then in those 4 years, I climbed a very steep, it was a very steep climb to my coming out and my just understanding different things, just such a steep learning curve, right? And I climbed it very fast. And I'm happy that I did, because I was already pretty far back. And so I climbed it very fast. And then when I wrote Boxes, it made me want to write that. It was clear that I had been thinking about this thing for so long. And that's what happened. Like, that's what birthed out of all of those years of just keeping it here and constantly being able to think about it, but never being able to talk about it to anybody else. And now suddenly I had this mic and this whole audience that I could speak to, right? And nobody knew me. So who cares if you like it or not? Who cares if you have a problem with what I'm saying or not? Who cares if you're like, oh my God, you're gay, you're gender non-conforming? I don't know you. It's never going to matter, right? But the reception that I got was so warm and so fantastic, in the sense that the conversation after the show happened, and that's what motivated me to do more, right? And so I started writing more poems, and then I found out about slam poetry, and then I made some friends in the poetry community, and I still continue to just, keep my head down and do open mic. And then like a national Women of the World Poetry Slam, which is a national poetry slam, came up. I competed at the local level, qualified to go to the national level, and then I competed against 96 poets at the national level in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was my first slam.
Is that where you performed Pigtails? I think on YouTube it said
yes,
Albuquerque.
Pigtails, correct. That was at one of the bouts. And then surprisingly, I never saw this coming. I just wanted to go do something fun, like it was adventure for me. It was a new experience for me. And suddenly I find out I'm one of the 12 finalists on the final stage. And so I wasn't prepared to be a finalist, so I didn't have enough poems. Right? I was not prepared for that, you know, like it just happened so fast. And so I'm sitting in my hotel room trying to write new poems and like pulling out old ones and being like, because you can't perform the same poem twice.
And suddenly your next poem is called Hotel Room.
Hotel room, right? The next poem is called A Good Problem to Have, sitting in a hotel room. And so I was like trying to refurbish other poems that were old poems, but I hadn't really done anything with, et cetera, et cetera. And then I ended up placing 5th on stage, and it was such a fantastic opportunity. It was so nice. It was just such a fantastic, experience. And then as I became more active in the Tampa Bay activism community, that started to make sense. And then I started doing features across the country. So, you know, Busboys and Poets in DC, New York Poets Cafe in New York. And I started doing those features. As I was doing poems in different places, those conversations just kept happening, right? Regardless of whether it was at a protest or regardless of whether it was at a venue. As those conversations kept happening, that's when I started realizing that's what I want.
I've always been interested in combining art with activism, and and am interested to hear your thoughts on why you think art is such a powerful tool to kind of change minds and get points across in a way that maybe reading an article in a newspaper isn't.
Right. I mean, well, for starters, it's always been, right? The reason why you cut funding from the arts first is because, you know, it gives voice to people that you otherwise wouldn't allow it to. So the arts has a way of, even in its most like classist periods, it always has a way of dismantling privilege in the most unknowing ways, right? Like it's subversive by nature of the work itself. Secondly, I think that when you put a face to someone and when you have that person, especially with spoken words, speak it to you, you have no option but to hear them. You know, you have no option but to listen, right? And you may or may not hear them, but you have no option but to listen. And so when, you know, reading a poem off a page is there, I think has a lot of impact, right? But then if I could hear that, just think about any poem that you absolutely, you love, you know, that makes you cry, that makes you laugh, that makes you feel anything, anger, whatever it might be, right? Whatever it might be, imagine that person standing in front of you, reading that poem. The effect is beyond what we can comprehend. And so being able to see somebody do something like that and speak their truth, which sometimes can be so unsafe because of its authenticity, forces people to check their own allowance of authenticity of both other people and themselves, right? And that is both a precarious and a beautiful place to be.
That, given the popularity of spoken word lately, and of course during the inauguration, Amanda Gorman's very inspiring poem, do you think that is inspiring poets to want to keep creating and thinking that maybe one day they'll have a chance to be there or be the poet, the national poet laureate? Or do you feel that there needs to be more effort in expanding venues for poets?
Well, poets will never stop poeming no matter what happens. No, you know, like you don't have to get up on that presidential inauguration stage for you to be a poet. We will poet for everybody that needs that poem. It can be a room full of 1,000 people, and if one person needs that poem, we'll get up on the stage and we'll do the work. We will be in those spaces doing that work consistently, no matter what elite honor is bestowed upon us. Not why we do it. But should elite honors be bestowed upon us? Absolutely. Therefore, should more venues and spaces be opened up to every single one of us? Absolutely.
Maybe we should have you read something for us or perform.
I could. I absolutely could.
Because isn't it you that said the National Poetry Society stipulates that every conversation needs to end with a poem?
Oh Lord, that was totally fake. Okay, Zach, the National Poetry Society did not say diddly squat like that. I just wanted to give the audience a good laugh.
And you did it for TEDx, so if
I did it for TEDx.
Gotta do it for us.
So I wrote this poem about 3 years ago, 2018, for International Women's Day, and shortly thereafter, I was forced to leave the country and go to India, where I was for 2 months, and I was not. We're pretty confident that I wasn't coming back, but I fought my way back to the States, which is my home and where I live. And so this poem was very, I knew something was about to happen. This poem was written in March. I knew something was about to happen. So this poem holds a lot of hope and anger and lack of justification in the world that we live in, right? In it. But I've also performed this poem since then several times, and every time it just seems to draw more meaning from the world we're living in right now. Okay, so it's called the Immigrant Poem, and this is how it goes. Some days, the most honest thing that I can do for myself is to listen to the sound of my heart beating. In the morning, right before I wake, right before reality seeps its way through to remind me of this thing called surviving, there is a brief moment before I open my eyes, when the only sound I hear is the soft snore of my puppy, peaceful at the edge of my bed, and the loud, persistent comfort of my beating heart. I wonder, is this what freedom sounds like? I watch young white boys get their driver's permits like awards that celebrate the mediocrity they will shine on for the rest of their lives. Tongues carved in colonial tradition, learning only ignorance as second language, speaking of the legality of a back door while lining the gates at the front with guns aimed at Black and brown children. This country is not a nation of immigrants. It is a land that was imagined on the genocide of native humans, built on the backs of slaves, and devised to hold the heads of minorities underwater while still forcing us to breathe. The life of an immigrant woman is not for the faint-hearted. It requires years of practice walking on eggshells around your own existence, testing the pain tolerance of your own skin, looking around your own home to see if anyone's watching when you kiss your lover, watching over your shoulder when dancing at a nightclub, hoping that you don't accidentally speak your beloved first language at an airport. I wonder if I will ever hear my heart beating without trying. Perhaps this is what freedom sounds like. Millions of hearts across the world beating harder every day. I wonder if this is why mothers of dead children cradle their heads to their chest, so the last thing their souls will hear is a steady beat of a mother's heart over the deafening sound of a racist bullet. I wonder if the founding fathers held their palms over their hearts when taking the Pledge of Allegiance to drown out the humanity of their heartbeats. I wonder if faith leaders rely on their heartbeat to give them rhythm when reciting prayers so they can drown out the sound of hate. I know that my heartbeat gets louder with every line of this poem because my word is my everything. I know that an activist speaks from their heart no matter how afraid their mind is. I know that no wall can keep our community away from us as long as our hearts are beating. I wonder if freedom will ever be our first language. I know this fight won't end in my lifetime. This legacy has outgrown its roots, but decades from now, when this country elects to its highest office a queer, transgender, hijabi Muslim woman of color who came to this country undocumented, ran her whole campaign on her history of being a sex worker, partnered with a gender non-conforming woman of color who raises pit bulls as children, I know then we will hear the future of their heartbeats beating loud and clear, sounding well over the sound of white supremacist patriarchy. And none of us will ever forget where we came from.